welcome to Coach Aria's weekly webinar. Today is the Masters in Coaching series, and the session's on silence. So I will not be here because all of you know that silence is not my forte, quite the opposite. But it is the forte of a good coach, and that's why these lovely people are here on the panel today. Many of you are joining us from India, and many of you in our community and watching this later are from India. And I can honestly say that I have no words to even be able to relate to what you are going through in India right now. I mean, my heart's still reeling from this morning, a conversation that I had with someone in India who told me about her friend's husband who passed away from COVID this week. 40-year-old guy. I'm 40. I'm healthy. This person was 40 years old and seemingly taking care. And I mean, she said that she feels like death is at the door and people just don't know what to do. And I cannot presume to even understand how people are feeling because I'm so lucky and fortunate to be where I am. And I think a lot of us at Coach Aria feel that way, no matter where we are in the world. And we wanted to do something. We can't solve things, but what we can do is be good listeners and support those of you who need it in a way that we know how, which is through listening, through coaching. So we have brought back our support groups. That's what you see on your screen. Literally this week, we just started it kind of over the weekend, and so many people volunteered to host these. They're coaches, they're counselors, they all know what they're doing. So we decided that every single day of the week, for as long as it takes, we're going to have a support group that is free and open to the public. And of course, private and anonymous and all of that. People do need to register only because, of legal issues. We need to make sure that Coach Aria is doing the right thing by all participants. But the support groups are going to happen every single day. So we put them in the IST, the India time, because the catalyst for this is a situation in India, and just over and above the physical toll that this is taking on people, the emotional and psychological toll, mental toll is what's where we feel that we can maybe do a tiny bit to help people. So we're focusing on making sure that we can support the communities in India. So it's going to be Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday at 6 p.m. in the evening, and Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday at 9 a.m. in the morning. The way that these groups will work is literally anybody. So please tell your friends, tell your networks. If you work with an NGO, if you volunteer, if you're within a company where you have access to an intranet, no one will be turned away, as long as you speak English, because we do have some limitations. But the way that this will work, or is working, is people go to that page, so coacharia.com/support-groups, and I'll also make sure that a few other URLs work so that people don't ever miss it. You go there and you register so that you get the Zoom link and the password. And once you have that, you can attend any session. Okay, so you register once and then you come whenever you want. When you get there, there will be a coach or a counselor, or a coach who's also a counselor, who will be there to facilitate the session. And whatever happens is going to happen. I mean, it's going to depend on who shows up, how many people show up. We did try these back when the pandemic first started, and they worked really well until people didn't want them anymore, and that's fine. But the way that it worked was people would show up, and usually there'd be some people who just want to be off camera and in the background and just be there. It's just a group session, by the way. These are all group. So some people would always kind of just listen and be there and just be part of the session. Others will be quite vocal and they will share, but no one has to go on camera. No one has to speak. People can even, they have to register with the real name and email. But if you want to change your name in Zoom, we will make sure that feature stays on. So if someone doesn't want to share their name, they don't have to. This is just there because we want to do something. We have to do something, especially those of us who are privileged and are not suffering. So, this is open to all of you. Cindy asked me to remind you, this is open to you too. This is not just for people who are outside our community. This is for literally anybody. There will be a coach or a counselor available at the times that are listed on your screen right now. So please come, please tell your networks. I will be sending an email to all of you later today with some details of where you can download little posters like this so that you can share them on your social media. And I will also send you some text that you can share in an email with a community or group that you have. And if you want to volunteer to be one of the facilitators or counselors, you can also do that. You would have received an email from me on Friday about that. So many of you raised your hands that we actually have enough counselors and coaches. But if you want to participate, of course, we'd love to have you. Honestly, I think this would be so amazing if this takes off and is something that we do on a regular basis, COVID or not, because let's be honest, the world sucks right now. And someone from Palestine, yeah, there's no one who knows how bad things can be than people who are currently in war zones, in COVID affected areas. I mean, disasters are going to keep happening. The world is not a wonderful place for many of us. So the support groups will always have their place. Yeah, I need to breathe. Okay. I'm going to hand it over to Cindy and I'm going to take a deep breath. I just want to say thank you to our generous and amazing and wonderful community. You guys know how excited I get when I talk to you, because every time that I interact with this group or any part of Coacharia, I'm amazed by how generous and helpful and giving and just amazing all of you are. And I don't know what I must have done in a previous life to be able to be part of this group, but it's pretty amazing. And this initiative will share what I get to experience and what all of us you get to experience from each other with those who don't have access to someone who will listen, who don't have access to help and support. So please, 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 please get involved and please share. And I'm now going to practice silence and vanish. Cindy, over to you.
Thank you, Magda. And it's not just your privilege to be a part of everyone, this group. I think it's everyone's privilege that you are here. Thank you. So let's talk about today's topic: silences, pauses, and reflection. And the one thing I would encourage all of you to do today is not to become silent, but become an active participant in the chat box. So really engage in the topic, share your thoughts, your views, or what do you do to practice silence, pauses, and reflections? Or even if you're not practicing it, what are your thoughts on it? So please do not go silent. Don't reflect for today, for this 1 hour. Reflect afterwards, but use the time to actively engage on the topic. So let's talk a bit about the topic. And to do that, I want to start by introducing our panelist. Priya is known to many of you. She's a Coacharia trainer for quite a few years, and I think all of you know her abilities, capabilities, and talents as a trainer, a coach, and just a wonderful human being. And if you want to know more about Priya, log on to the Coacharia website or look at her LinkedIn profile. Priya will cover part of the topic today and in a very engaging dialogue way, meaning you'd be included, the other two panelists would be included too. I also would like to introduce you to Pranav, which I think many of you know. If you don't, Pranav is Ram's son and the co-founder of Coach Arya. So we're really very grateful to have Pranav join us. And why I say that is because in all my interactions with Pranav, there's something I noticed. He's quite reflective. There's like a moment of quietness, silence, and then the words come out. And it's very engaging and very acknowledging to the other. You know, it's like giving attention to the words of others and then responding. And I think that is, that's such a lovely process of presence, trust, communication that shows up. If you want to know more about Pranav and what he does and all his capabilities and talents and roles that he plays, click on Coach Arya's website, read about him, or go to his LinkedIn profile and you would get to know more about him. Pranav would also do a part of today's topic, and again, in an engaging way. Just for me to say a little bit about introducing the topic. Silence is not just the absence of talking, right? It's not just the absence of talking. It's quite an active process. It's quite active, but it's active inside, meaning some things go still on the outside to allow some things to show up on the inside. And the some things could be thoughts, feelings, some things around energy, some things around beingness and impacts, and how does the person, just what is going on inside you. Pauses and silence allows us the space for pauses and reflections. You know, if you're not silent, then it's difficult to do any kind of reflecting, introspect, contemplation, all words associated with silence. And by the ICF very definition of coaching, silence is included in this word thought-provoking. Thought-provoking. Thought-provoking can't just be outside with the words coming out of our mouths. Of course, that's a large part of it. But thought-provoking allows for some silence, allows for outer stillness so that the inside can become active. And of course, in the updated core competencies on maintaining presence, there's a marker there that makes reference to pauses, silence, pauses, and reflections. That's your on maintaining presence, a sub-point 6, where the coach creates or allows space for silence, pauses, and reflections. Priya is going to do a lot more talking around that, so I'm not going to go into that. I just want to mention it. And I want to also mention this from a cultural point of view. Many cultures around the world, I may not be aware of all, so I will not name any, but I think you have a good sense if you think about it. Many cultures, silence is a very important part of communication. There's also a lot of research done around silence, and in the latter part of today's webinar, we'll take a look at that. For now, I'm going to stop talking. I'll take a pause and hand over to Priya.
Thank you, Cindy. Absolute pleasure to partner with you and Pranav and all the participants here. We are 153 strong. So we start off with really understanding a little bit more about silence and pause. So I want to invite all of you to put on the chat box what really is the significance of silence and pause in a coaching conversation. It's so significant, it's even part of the competency, right? So clearly a lot of thought has gone into it. So inviting your responses on the chat box as to what you think is the importance or the significance of allowing for silence and pause in a coaching conversation. Allowing space, listening. Silence is the time for client to process, yeah? Deeper listening. Allows introspection, invites introspection. Space, support. Wonderful. I think this, I'm sure a lot of you are already practicing this if you're coaches, because there seems to be quite a good understanding of what this can do in a coaching conversation. I want to just build on some of the things that all of you have shared in the chat box. Looking at it also from one of the books that has been a big influence in my life as a coach. And this is a book called Quiet Leadership by David Rock. And he borrows heavily from neuroscience, where he says that when you start reflecting and you move into a state of pause or silence or stillness inside of you, what really happens is that in that stillness, new connections are made possible. Connections which you were not probably aware of, because otherwise it's just buzzing and you're just constantly talking. You don't step back. When you step back, go within, it is possible for new things to emerge. So silence and pause really for me is a very generative space, a space of possibilities. It's really not a dead space. It's a very active space, like Cindy said, a place for possibilities. One of the things that also stands out for me is in that space of quietness and stillness, that's the space you can really connect with your intuition. So often we just kind of walk past, we don't hear ourselves, we don't hear the intuition, we don't pay attention to it. And it's only in the space of silence and pause that comes forth. And we know as coaches that intuition plays a really big part in helping the client to reframe whatever challenges that they are facing, right? So Pranav, any thoughts from your side in terms of how do you see this as an important part of any conversation?
Thanks, Priya. So I think the way I think of it is, and we can even do this as an exercise, is that silence is the absence of sound. Now, I think if we were all to just take 30 seconds, maybe close our eyes, maybe not, and just sit in silence and just see what happens. I had someone do this to me recently, and it was interesting. So I mean, let's not take 30 seconds. Let's take 5 seconds. Take 5 seconds and don't say anything. I'll stop talking and just listen to what you hear in those 5 seconds. So even in that short amount of time, you probably heard various things, background noise, your own body making sounds, birds. I can hear my daughter trying to be quiet in the background. So they're really, I mean, the idea of silence is that if it just being silent allows you to focus your energies on other places. And in this case, I think the focus is then on the client. I'm going to throw it back to you, Priya. I don't want to go too deep into it because some of this plays into my reflection piece, but that was my quick answer to that.
Sure. Thanks, Pranav. I think sometimes we are scared of silences and pauses, right? We are a bit afraid sometimes to stop talking and just find that stillness inside. So I'm just, Cindy, in your experience with coaches and coach training, what do you think is something that really holds people back? And, everybody rushes into saying the next thing, asking the next thing. What do you think is holding people back from offering that space for the generative process to emerge from silence?
So Priya, naturally connecting, and especially in the coaching space, because we are people, we care about people development so much, and natural show up is communication, right? Outer communication. So of course, in trying to build trust and to make the client comfortable and just do, we show up using more words than silence. And we show up to reassure, to build, to comfort, to challenge, to whatever. But all these allude to words. So we show up with words. And I think generally people show up with words. And yet, and when they get comfortable and they do some allowing to happen, then the silence begins to show up, sometimes in small ways, and sometimes with more a space of allowing or knowing there's something deeper going on. This client is in the space of reflection, something new is going on. So there becomes longer periods of awareness for the silence. I also want to say this, in a few seconds that we took for silence, the exercise Pranav did, what I noticed is that sitting here in quietness, I was holding many pieces of this webinar. I was going, and don't forget that, and don't forget that, and remember that, and remember that. And in that few minutes of silence, I felt the barrier to the knowing disappear. So it's not like I forgot anything. Of course, I still remember it, but holding that space or that had a bit of anxiety to remember had disappeared. So there's this power to silence. It allows some of the things cognitively to leave you. And you still show up with those things, but in a different way.
Right. It's interesting, Cindy, because I also found it very relevant that when a coach is able to pause, in some ways you're modeling that for the client as well. In a way, the client is therefore now able to look at themselves. Because what is coaching, right? It's about taking somebody from one space to the other. And the other space that we're talking about is really a new way of looking at things, a new perspective. And that cannot happen when we are just in the space of words and the same thoughts going round and round, right? It requires, like Einstein said, right? The solutions cannot come from the same consciousness where the problem was created. So you've got to step back. You've got to create that space between what is happening and yourself. And that space is a deeper stillness that you find. So you can look at yourself, you can actually examine your thoughts, you can examine your emotions and make new meanings out of it so that you can move forward to a more resourceful state. Yes?
Go ahead. Pranav, wait 1 minute. Can I ask the participants to say what they noticed in their silence? When you were quiet, can you type into the chat box anything that showed up for you? What did you notice? Were there anything that was showing up? Please type it into the chat box. Sorry, Pranav, you go ahead.
Thanks, Sati. One of the thoughts that was popping into my head is, I'm I'm a pragmatist, and when I did really, I remember the modality on creating silence when I was taking my coaching certification, and it resonated with me because I think I do appreciate silence naturally, and I understand it. In practice, it's a lot harder, and I wanted to take the time to talk a little bit about how one actually accomplishes that. And I've experienced it on both sides, as me being the coach, talking to a client and creating the silent spaces, but also being the client in, say, a therapy session. And it'd be interesting to know, I haven't done the research, but how they are taught to create the silent pauses and what they do. Now, the thing that I'm pragmatic about is that culturally there might be differences. I think maybe, I know a little bit about both the Indian and the American cultures, and I think perhaps silence in Asian cultures is a little more acceptable. In the US, being silent is awkward. And people then try to fill that silence with whatever it is they can do just to get rid of that awkwardness. Yeah. So I think there is some practice required to achieve that.
Yeah. And I think to the question earlier on as to why do we rush in is perhaps the awkwardness, as you were speaking, right, Pranav? I think, and I think it's a good time to reiterate that we are moving into uncomfortable spaces. If change needs to happen, we have to lean into the discomfort, as they say. And all of that emerges only in quiet spaces in the conversation. Yeah. So it's very interesting that it's built into the core competencies under presence, where you're present for yourself and you're present for the client. One of the questions that often get asked is, how much is too much of silence or pause in a conversation? How long does the coach hold that space? And I think it's really important because it's an important question, because it's not a tactical transactional thing that, okay, now I give a pause. But it's really about looking at because even when there is a pause, there's an exchange of energy. You are communicating at some level. And it's really about being sensitive to where is that energy taking us? What's emerging from that space? What possibilities are coming up? And really, and you can't do that without being present. Interestingly, it's also built into this core competency about embodying coaching mindset, where we're talking about reflective practice as being a very critical part of coaches' development. So I know Cindy was alluding to, Pranav, you have some practices and you'd like to share some. So over to you, love to hear what your experiences are.
Sure. Before I talk about why self-reflection is important for coaches or for anyone in general, I wanted to bring up a sort of a philosophical question that comes up a lot at least in classes here in the US, and maybe some of you are familiar with it, but it's basically the statements: if a tree falls in a forest and no one's around to hear it, doesn't make a sound. So it's essentially it's a sort of a discussion around perception versus reality. If a tree falls in a forest, it is going to create vibrations. The vibrations will travel through the air, but unless there's an animal or a human ear to hear it, there is no sound produced. So there's an argument around that that people have, but what it comes down to is the relationship between observation and perception. And I think it was an interesting thought. I'll sort of leave it there. There's no sort of good way to connect it to what silence is, but I think it's important to think about it with that lens. I mean, I think the reason why self-reflection is really important as a coach is as Priya, as you said, you're modeling the behavior for the client. So if you're able to create a reflective space for yourself, then so the client can also do so. And it can be accomplished in many different ways. And I sort of started listing my own ways, and then I can go through them. And but before I prime the audience, I think it would be great if people can post in the chat box what their how they achieve reflection. For me, as you're typing, I'll just list mine. Magda actually said that she walks her dog. So that was one of her ways of achieving reflection. For me, it could be working out. I've tried writing notes, gratitude notes, which is every day write 3 things that you're grateful for. That's a sort of a popular one here. People journal. For me, music is a big one. I really find the sound of music, especially jazz, can be very thought-provoking in a reflective manner. Some people need to be in a physical space. For some people, talking is a way of reflecting. They actually need to talk about it. Meditating is a popular one. Exercise is a popular one. And one that I think I use often is, there are many ways to do it. I don't want to get into the ways to do it because there are probably legalities around it, but seeing oneself in a different perspective I think is integral to be reflective. So what I mean by that, let me take a universal method of doing it. It could be any of the things I listed, but let's say take alcohol. A glass of wine allows you to change the perspective of how you typically view yourself, and that in itself is sort of awakening. And I think that is one thing, just step out of your own body. And whatever way you can achieve that, some people can achieve it through meditation, others need other stimulants to make it happen, but that's one way of achieving reflection to me. One thought I had around reflection is, for me, at least in my opinion, it has to happen right away. So while the ideas, the thoughts are fresh in my mind, because over time things get diluted and convoluted. And I think right away, if I were to reflect on something, it has the most power, and it allows me to think about what went well, what I could have done differently, what went poorly, and internalize that moment. Before I keep talking, I just want to make sure Priya and Cindy, if you have any ideas on what I just said.
I just want to jump in here, Pranav. So I had an experience. I went for a course on storytelling. And the entire morning was on the concepts of storytelling and how do you tell a story. The second half, we were asked to do some knitting. And I'm not someone who loves to knit or knows anything about knitting, but the basics were taught. I didn't say it, but internally I was protesting because I didn't know what to do with this. And, I was really fumbling. It was a week-long course. And by the second and the third day, I had found a quiet space within. Because this was a mechanical task, right? It was not about the design or what I was knitting. But in that mechanical routine task, what really happened was the learning from the morning started getting anchored, connected, embedded. And somehow I walked away with saying, this is what I got from today's session. Which I think if I hadn't paused to really reflect, I wouldn't have been able to do. So like you said, there are different ways to reflect, different methodologies. But I found this very interesting that something as simple as a mechanical task can become a reflective process.
Sure. What you're saying resonates for me a lot in terms of creating muscle memory or neuron memory, whatever the appropriate medical terminology is. For instance, if I'm playing the guitar, playing the same lick 20 times will allow my body to finally, the cells in my body to remember it, such that it's muscle memory. And I think what it makes me think about is that both the practice of being silent, the practice of reflection, are either they're innate or you have to learn them. If they're innate, good for you. According to Cindy, they're innate for me. And Cindy, I'm going to use what you said for my eulogy, because when I'm gone, if someone says if that's all they say about me is that I'm reflective, it'll be a good eulogy for me. I think if it is not innate, and I've been both an introvert and an extrovert in my life, and I think a lot of that comes from just being an introvert. My family jokes about the fact that I didn't actually talk till I was 6 years old. So I spent a lot of time listening, I guess, and it became a part of me. As I've gotten older, I think maturity and confidence, et cetera, allow me to be more extroverted, but I can lapse back into that introvert phase. And I think that's what Cindy observed in me. So I think there's a self-awareness that needs to happen where you understand whether you have it or you don't. And if you don't, then you just have to practice a little bit more to get to it. And I think, how do you build a skill? You practice so you can develop and maintain a mindset that is open, curious, flexible, and client-centric. And you use awareness of self and your intuition to benefit the clients.
And it's a little bit more than introvert for now. So I'm engaging this in conversation with you. It's people like you and a lot of others that I notice when you come across, it's like you fully heard the other person. And in order to respond meaningfully, person or persons, right? Because I've also watched you or interacted with you at a conference, in a group situation, so I know. It's almost as if you're picking up things, all what you're hearing, and when you come across, it's honoring a whole lot of words said that requires a quiet moment, and then it comes across in a very simple way. It's not like you have to say everything, but in that few words, it comes across as honoring everything that was meaningful or you paid attention to. Yeah?
Yeah, I think it's an ability to listen powerfully.
Yeah.
To everything that the person is saying, to summarize what they're saying, say it back to them, reflect it back to them, right?
Yeah.
The simplicity of it might just be because I'm very simple and it comes off as simple, but I think it is that, and I think there's an appreciation of the ability of just that moment, right? As you're stating, and the only thing I can say to you is it's not something I attempt to achieve. I think it just has come over time and practice. And I really do think that distinction I make between the introvert and the extrovert and the spectrum that exists between those two, it's spanning that spectrum back and forth. And I think that truly creates it's all about where the energy comes from, right? If you're an introvert, you get the energy from your silence. If you're an extrovert, you get the energy from other people. And balancing that in even a two-way conversation, and being aware of that, I think is what the ability that you're talking about.
Yeah, no, it's wonderful how you did that polarized thinking just now of the introvert, extrovert, and found all the commonalities and spaces in between. I love that. Yeah. Okay. I'm not going to go into a reflective space now because, I'll join all the dots around that. And yeah. what else do we need to pick up on reflections? Is there anything else? Maybe self-reflection. Oh, we did speak about that, right? Yeah. What practices you could use for your own self-reflection.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
I happen to, sorry, Pranav, did I interrupt?
No, go ahead, Priya.
So I happen to go through a little bit of material on reflection as a practice. And there was some research done by, her name is Giada Stefano. She's an assistant professor of strategy and business policy in HEC Paris. And they had, as part of the research paper, they worked on, in an organization. Now we're going beyond coaching. We are saying, of course, we always say leaders embody a lot of coaching competencies and skills. So it's not restricted to just coaching. So what they did was they conducted an experiment for their employees where the employees went through a training program for 30 days. And they went through the program and they went back to work. There was another group which went through this program, and as part of it, they were asked to reflect for 15 minutes every day to capture what they have learned or just any thought that came to their mind, simply that quiet space for themselves every day. And over a period of time, when they mapped the employees, and they found that those who reflected and made it a conscious practice, incorporated it into their, as part of their daily routine, their productivity went up by 23%. So I think there's more and more evidence to say, I mean, there are very many papers written on it. There's another paper on philosophy of coaching. A lot of papers and research being done about the power of incorporating the reflective practice. But very often, I think the challenge that we face is that we keep saying that we want to reflect and we imagine it will happen. We don't actually factor in the time to stop and think and reflect. So that's something that I have experienced, that unless it's factored into your daily calendar, so to say, it's very easy for other things to take over.
Yeah. And then Priya, I think it brings up a good point, which is the practice part, which is the concept of being silent and reflecting versus the actual execution of it, right? So again, pragmatically, we can talk about it, we can listen to people talk about it, we can listen to us talk about it here, yeah. But how are you actually going to accomplish that as a practicing activated coach? And I was scanning through the chat here, and someone put in birth order, which I think is an interesting idea. You know, if you're the first child versus the third child, you know, what is that innate or learned ability to be silent? Imagine the third child is probably more silent than the first child. There are other things that come into play. There are times when my friends will tell me that I'm more reflective when I'm having a discussion with them. And I don't admit this, but I was like, because I'm really tired. So I don't really feel like talking that much, so I'm just going to listen. So I think at the end of the day, it's it's a lot of that nature and nurture, but it's also where you are and how you're present at the time. And it goes back to the concept of mindfulness. Although in this instance, you know, my father Ram and I coined the term mindlessness, which I think is much more appropriate because it's taking everything out of your mind and letting it go. And that would then allow you to be fully present. And when you're silent, like Cindy said, you're not thinking about all the myriad of things that you're running through your head at every given moment. You're just there. And that's a whole other topic, another webinar, I'm sure. But anyway, that was my comment to what you said, Priya.
Thank you.
Yeah. That's a lovely research there, Priya. I think if you have the link, put it up on the chat so we can relook at it and get to know a little bit more about it.
Yeah.
The other thing I want to pick up on is the discomfort of silence. I think, Priya, you alluded to it, and Pranav, you picked up a lot on it with culture. different cultures, there's a discomfort with silence. And coaches do experience that in coaching. And that question is such a common one. How much is too much? I remember in the early days, years ago, I forgot how long, I was delivering a workshop. It was a 5-day workshop. And it was on personal mastery. And I remember starting to talk, and there was dead silence in the room. And all I could think about at that moment was, am I doing something wrong? Is what I'm saying the wrong thing? Why is everybody staring at me and nobody saying anything? I could feel all these eyes on me, and you could hear a pin drop. So I couldn't wait to give everybody a piece of exercise and let them get busy. And I quickly went to the co-facilitator and asked, did I say something wrong? What happened here? And she said, oh, it's amazing how we hold these biases on ourselves. And she said, no, it was just interesting. And I thought, oh, I think that was my first association of silence in a group. You know, what could happen when you can really connect? Because I would imagine on the other side, if I was there, I would be connecting a whole lot of dots to the spoken word and to my own experiences. Because I think in adult learning theories, that makes sense, right? When we begin to make sense and make meaning of what is said in relation to ourselves. And exactly the same in coaching, you know, this question when you ask clients, you notice they always go quiet. The meaningfulness of something like the goal or something they're doing for themselves. Like, what would it mean for you if you did X, Y, and Z? And that question always takes people back. There's this moment of silence. Oh, not really all these outside things I'm talking about here. What would it mean for me?
It's very powerful, Cindy, what you said. And I think in a coaching session, really people are able to go into that deeper space only when the questioning is thought-provoking about themselves, their own experience, as we call the who, right? When we talk about external things, there's just the cognitive process just goes on. They're thinking, they're reflecting, but it's not deep reflection where they're connecting to themselves. And that's not always, like we said, not always comfortable, because you don't know what's going to come up. And then if there is a trusting environment, safety created, I guess the relationship becomes stronger and they know that they can allow for that to come up.
So I want to invite anybody who wants to come and join us for a minute or two to the panel, or perhaps you have a question for us, please put it onto the chat box. And I just want to check if Ram is on the call. Is Ram on the call?
We wouldn't know.
I'm not sure. How would I know? I think Magda would know the answer to that, right? So coaches, while we're doing that, while we're checking if Ram is on the call, I'd love to invite him for a minute into the panel. I'd like to check in with you around, let's talk a bit about support and resources for yourself as you build more skills around silences and reflective practice. And in Coacharia, you know, we have a dual credentialing approach, that of EMCC and maybe I should say a three-way credentialing approach, EMCC, ICF, and BCC, right? And many of you that have engaged with the ICF process knows all about reflective practices, and both our panelists spoke about journaling and etc. Also for EMCC, you are writing reflective practices consciously. So we all make a conscious effort as learners, coaches, trainers, to become more and more skillful at the art of reflective practice. It's learning in progress for all of us. So let's open this conversation on resources and support. If you know of any good resources around how you can build silence, reflections, any books, please, would you go ahead, share it with us into the chat box. We'd love to hear all your resources. And Priya spoke about David Rock's quiet leadership. There's one of his models. I'm not sure whether you're all aware of it, but you can Google it. And it's quite a lovely graphic. 4 faces of an insight. And there's 4 faces. And it's the first phase is you become aware of a dilemma. There is awareness that you have a dilemma or there's something that's troubling you. And the second phase is reflection. So you're aware of it, you're talking about it, and when you begin to reflect on it, you take some quiet time and reflect on it, that's when the ha-ha moments begin to show up. And of course, the third phase is illumination, the ha-ha. There's a burst of energy around, I got it, or something showing up as lighter. And of course, the fourth one is around, now you have the motivation to do something about it. So please go ahead, share all the resources you have under the chat box, put in your links so we can build some resources around silences, pause, and reflections.
While it comes up on the chat box, a thought just occurred to me. You know, sometimes we think about this reflective process as you have a question, something gets triggered for you, and you want to kind of think through it. You want to reflect on it. Sometimes the answers to that, it's not very linear. It's not like you ask this question and you think about it and this comes up. Sometimes it's when you're doing some other activity that the answer for this comes up. So I also want to sort of lay it on the table that sometimes is reflective practice and we want to work on ourselves and use it for our personal growth and development and awareness. It may not follow a certain pattern that when I ask this question and I write about it in my journal, I will get this answer. It's really putting out that question there and allowing for that question to sort of find its way into an answer. And sometimes the dots get connected, not particularly in a linear way. That's been my experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, I talked a little bit about changing perspective, trying to see yourself from another perspective. There's a popular meditation out here. I'm sure it's quite common in Asia and India, Vipassana, which is, they call it the silent retreat here. A lot of people love to go to it. My joke about it is that people say it's challenging to be in a Vipassana, 2-week meditation. For me, would be the easiest thing in the world. I just learned to talk for 2 weeks. That's amazing. But I think when you talk about practice, that is one way to do it. See what it's like to not have a conversation for 2 weeks. And I will say there's been a real world example of that for many of us in the last year, and for some of us still continuing. We've had very little social interactions. And for some of us that don't have families or are single, that's been loneliness or being alone and being in your own silence. So I think there's a lot of real world examples of how one can achieve and practice that.
Cindy, I see your hand up. Was there something that you wanted to share?
No. How do I put it down?
You can go back to raise hand and say.
I'm on my phone, so it's.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's all right.
Things look very small. No, but I didn't want to. Sorry.
I'm just checking in the chat box, Cindy, for any questions that might have come up.
Yes. Yeah, Priya?
Yeah. I'm just going. I don't see too many questions, but there's been a lot of reflection.
Yeah. Yeah, lovely reflections. Are there any questions?
I don't see any questions, no. There's one in the, yeah, no.
The Q&A box?
No, that's just a comment.
So coaches, what do you do? I mean, I know you asked this question, you answered this around reflections. So let me ask this question differently. How comfortable are you with silences in your coaching conversations? Yeah? Put it on a scale of 1 to 10, where 10 being, I'm quite comfortable. I can easily allow for silence. And 1 being, creates a lot of discomfort in me. I don't know what to do. Where are you with your, that's wonderful to hear. 9s, lots of 10s. 7, yeah.
Cindy, there are a couple of questions if you want to answer them.
Can you take it, Pranav? Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. One is what's the difference between silence and mindlessness? I mean, I think they're different because one allows the other, right? The mindlessness allows one to be silent in its true form, because then you're not ruminating on things within yourself. The second question is, how do we tune into our intuition to know when and how much pause is to be given? It's a good one. I will say that when I've been in the situation as a client, when the person pausing has to acknowledge why they paused, would be the time. That's too much time. It should be a natural feeling, and it shouldn't go into that space of I got to explain to them why I'm not saying anything, because then you just lost you lost the flow of that moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, what to do after the silence. It's quite lovely to reflect on that for a minute or two, around creating awareness on what to do when your client shares, after the silence. Maybe something like, I didn't realize I could do that, or I feel something's different in me having thought about it. And then, capture. There could be many examples here, but it's good to do some reflective type questioning. And, how did you feel now that you've realized that? Or what are you realizing? Is there anywhere in your body you may notice some energy change in the client, and you ask about that? And capture it into, what does the client want to do in this new space? What are they now motivated to do differently? So capture it into either strengths, discoveries, talents, learnings. Where else can the coach or the client use that? And of course, also to raise another point, what do you do when clients say, I've had quite a powerful session today. I don't want to take any actions. I still need to think more about this or reflect on what happened today. You can still do some good coaching around that, meaning, what do you normally do when you give yourself time to think, when you want to give yourself time to think? And how would you give yourself this time, and what would you be doing? How would you create it in your diary so that you have this time to think and reflect? And the client can make some notes around that and bring it to the next session to discuss with the coach what happened in those reflection moments. We have reached the end of our time, and we'll do a round of closing from our panelists. Pranav, I'll hand over to you and then to Priya, and we'll complete on today's session.
Sure. Thank you, Cindy, and thank you, Priya. I just had a couple of things. One is that in my litany of practical ideas on how to deal with silence and reflection, one is that bringing silence after a question is more productive than allowing someone to answer and then just staying silent, I've found. I think the latter can cause more of the awkward piece, and that's just practical experience for me. And I'm going to leave with a quote, lyrics from a song, Sound of Silence, Simon and Garfunkel, 1965. The lyrics are people talking without speaking, people hearing without listening, people writing songs that voices never shared. It has a lot more to do with social consciousness and the era, the time, the 1960s in the US and all that. But I think it has a very poignant sort of message. And it talks about our inability or unwillingness to emotionally communicate with one another. And I thought that would just be something to leave on. And other than that, I'm honored to been part of this. Good morning, good afternoon, good night to all the people around the world.
Thanks, Pranav. Lovely listening to all your sharing and awareness. And I just want to broadly put it out there. There's an MCC certificate waiting with your name on it.
Sorry, say that again, Cindy. I missed that part.
There's an MCC certificate waiting for you with your name on it.
You sound like my dad.
Oh, okay. I could resist that.
Pranav, you want to take a pause on that?
Yes, I'll reflect on it a little bit, Cindy and Priya. Thank you.
Wonderful. Coaches, as we're rounding up, please let us know what value you're taking away from today's session. We'd love to hear from you. What value are you walking away with from today's session? Priya, you want to complete?
For me, this is a very dear topic. And reflective practice is something that I've always done. And I thoroughly enjoy, because right from when I was little, I used to believe I was my best friend. So I used to keep writing and not edit it, just write, And one of the things that I'd like to invite the group to do is to seriously get into a reflective practice, whatever that may be. And I would like to place 3 separate ways in which you can do it. One is to reflect before the session in a way to center yourself before you go in. Reflection and reflective questions during the session with the pauses and the silence. And reflecting after the session bases your learning and your triggers and something for you to work on. So that's what I want to offer to the group here. And thank you so much, Pranav and Cindy, for having me here, and such lovely conversations. I think we should save the chat and look at what's come up. There's a lot of wisdom that's being shared on the chat box.
Yeah, can you save the chat and send it to me, please? Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, only Magda can save it. Okay.
So I'm just fine.
So Magda will put it onto YouTube and we'll be able to pick it up from there. Thank you, everyone. It was lovely being with you and listening to some of your thoughts, hearing you on the chat box. Priya suggested we do a second part to this, and we'll consider it sometime later in the year. But do stay safe and join us on the groups that Magda has created. We'd love to hear from you. Bye.